They say the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. But of that immense, unknowable time, we remember only a flicker. A few scattered millennia of pyramids, temples, and fractured stories carved into stone. And before that, darkness, silence, or so we believe. But what if that silence is not emptiness, but erasure? Somewhere beneath the oceanic crust off the coast of India, a series of megalithic structures lie buried in silt, structures that predate every known civilization. In the desert of Libya, fused glass plains stretch like melted mirrors, their composition whispering of temperatures no lightning could cause. And then, there are the isotopic anomalies, carbon signatures deep within Earth's oldest sediments, speaking of combustion, of industry, of something artificial. This is not a tale of aliens. This is a question older than myth. If another advanced civilization once rose on this Earth millions of years before us, how would we even know? Tonight, we follow that question, not to answer, but to remember. Breathe with me now and step into the spiral of deformed history. We begin not with a fact, but with a fracture. And perhaps through the cracks, something long buried will speak. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it for you. Right now, I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. In the year 2001, off the coast of Gujarat, India, sonar scans swept across the Gulf of Khambhat, searching for nothing more than signs of pollution. Instead, they found something else, something unexpected. Beneath 120 feet of murky water, the scans revealed geometric patterns, rows of stone blocks, symmetrical lines, long stretches of right-angled formations. Not random scatterings of nature, but structures, or what remained of them. Divers, brave or foolish, descended into the opaque depths. There, they brought up artifacts, tools, pottery shards, even fossilized bones. When dated, these fragments whispered a date that shook the timeline of human history, 9,500 years ago. That would place them at the very beginning of what we know as civilization. Older than Mesopotamia, older than the pyramids, older even than the idea that such complex societies could exist. But even that date, unsettling as it was, might not be the full truth. Some fragments hinted at a much deeper age, pushing back not just thousands, but tens of thousands of years. And if those hints are right, then the seabed near Khambhat doesn't just hold ruins. It holds a contradiction, a tear in the timeline. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed it. Natural formations, they said, misinterpretation, wishful thinking. Yet they could not fully explain the artifacts, nor the layout, nor the symmetrical complexity buried beneath the tides. And still the waves keep their secrets. But the question does not sleep. What if a civilization, with knowledge and order, lived and died long before our histories began? Not just 10,000 years ago, but hundreds of thousands, millions. Would the oceans not have swallowed it whole? And if it were gone, truly gone, what would remain? This is where the Silurian Hypothesis enters. A thought experiment proposed by two scientists, Dr. Gavin Schmidt, a climatologist from NASA, and Dr. Adam Frank, an astrophysicist. In 2018, they posed a simple but unsettling question in the journal International Journal of Astrobiology. If an industrial civilization had risen on Earth long before humans, would we be able to detect it? Their answer, not necessarily. Fossils are rare. Time is not kind to metal or plastic. After a few million years, even the bones of a city are crushed, subducted into the Earth's mantle, or broken down by wind and acid rain. What remains might be subtle, an anomaly in the isotope layers, a spike in carbon, a curious change in sediment, or a ruin, sunken and forgotten, like the patterns off Gujarat. The Silurian hypothesis is not about proving that a pre-human civilization existed. It's about understanding how fragile evidence can be, how time erases, and how absence does not always mean non-existence. It is named, with quiet irony, after the Silurians, a fictional race of intelligent reptiles from the British TV series Doctor Who. In the show, these beings ruled the Earth long before humans ever evolved. They built cities, had science, culture, knowledge, and then they vanished. All that remained was the planet itself, reclaimed by time. But fiction has its roots in instinct. And perhaps, somewhere deep in our collective psyche, there lingers a suspicion that we are not the first. Because the Earth is not a blank canvas. It is a palimpsest, a manuscript written and rewritten, scraped clean, then inked again. And sometimes, if you look closely at the parchment, you see the ghost of a word beneath the new script. Faint, fragile, unwelcome. In the Gulf of Kambat, some say, we have glimpsed one of those ghostly words, but one sight is not enough. The skeptical mind demands more. So we cast our gaze to the other side of the planet, to the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan. There, too, lies a structure beneath the sea, giant terraces carved from stone. Steps and platforms aligned with cardinal directions, sharp angles that suggest intention. Some geologists claim it is a natural formation, sandstone fractured and sculpted by current and tide. But others whisper a different possibility, that it was shaped, carved, that it belonged to a civilization drowned by the rising seas of the last ice age. And if so, what culture left it? What name did it bear? What language did it speak, and what gods did it fear? The seas do not answer. Instead, they hold their breath. We are trained to think of history as a line, straight, ascending, from stone tools to satellites, from caves to code. But Earth doesn't move in straight lines. It spirals. It breathes in cycles, extinction, emergence, forgetting, remembering. We have had 5 mass extinctions. Life has risen, flourished, and vanished, again and again. Why should intelligence be exempt from this cycle? If another civilization once lived here, whether 10,000 or 10 million years ago, perhaps it too climbed, built, reached, and perhaps it fell quietly, buried by lava, or drowned by tide, or scattered by time, until all that remained were questions, or rumors, or dreams. So tonight, we remember the Gulf of Kambat, not for what it proves, but for what it dares us to imagine. Not a lost city, perhaps, but a lost possibility. And beneath that possibility, another question stirs. Soft as silt, cold as deep water. If we are not the first, then what happened to those who came before? There is a place in Africa where the desert holds its breath, not because of what it reveals, but because of what it remembers. In the heart of the Sahara, where golden dunes shift like the folds of time, lies an enigma that refuses to be forgotten. The Rishat structure. To the untrained eye, it seems like a natural wonder. A vast concentric formation, sometimes called the Eye of the Sahara, stretching over 25 miles in diameter. A ripple in the Earth's crust. a geological curiosity. But from above, from the eye of the satellite, it takes on a different shape, a design, as if someone or something etched a symbol into the skin of the world. And then there is the rumor, the echo, that the Rishat structure resembles something else entirely, a city from legend, Atlantis. Plato's words, written over 2,000 years ago, speak of a city laid out in concentric rings of water and land, with a central island, great walls and canals, a city of unimaginable advancement, swallowed by catastrophe and lost to time. Scholars have long dismissed the story as allegory, a warning, a fiction cloaked in metaphor. But what if it wasn't? The Rishat structure fits Plato's description in shape, size, even geographical placement, when adjusted for shifting coastlines and ancient riverbeds. There are no ruined columns, no golden temples to be found. But the landscape speaks of a cataclysm, volcanic activity, ancient floods, seismic shifts that could bury anything or anyone who once dwelled there. And scattered in the sands of Mauritania, fragments of advanced metallurgy have been uncovered. Tiny spheres with grooves etched so precisely they baffle explanation. Not artifacts, perhaps, but hints, disobedient details. Could these be echoes of a civilization not simply lost, but systematically erased? Again, mainstream thought steps in. The eye of the Sahara, they argue, is natural. A collapsed geological dome, sculpted by erosion over millions of years. Beautiful, yes, but empty. No ruins, no writing, no evidence. But must a civilization always leave stone behind? In the dry caves of South Africa, ochre stones have been discovered, marked with patterns, grids, hatchings. Some are over 70,000 years old. They were not tools. They were symbols. And symbols, as we know, are the roots of memory. What if the library of a forgotten people was not made of marble, but of geometry? Not texts, but tectonics. What if the earth itself was their book, and we, the slow readers? The silence of the desert is not a lack of sound. It is a language of buried time. Wind moves the dunes like pages, and beneath them, stories sleep. A French ethnographer, Charles de Foucauld, once wrote that the Tuareg tribes of the Sahara spoke of cities beneath the sands, whole kingdoms swallowed, rivers that once flowed, stars that shifted, and the memory of a sky that wasn't like the sky we see today. The mythology of the Sahara is thick with echoes, serpents of fire, gods from the stars, beings of light who came before, dismissed as folklore. But folklore is not fiction. It is encrypted memory. Anthropologists call this mythic convergence, when unrelated cultures share similar legends without ever contacting one another. Civilizations across oceans and millennia, all whispering the same things, of a great flood, of a time before the fall, of knowledge once held and then taken away. So we ask, is it coincidence? Or is it residue? There's something haunting about the idea of knowledge buried, not by conquest, but by time itself. Imagine a city of quartz and copper, wiped clean not by enemy, but by sandstorms and silence, its libraries blown to dust, its stories remembered only as shadows. And perhaps that is what the Rishat structure is. Not Atlantis, but the footprint of something else, something older, a placeholder for a chapter erased. We are told that human civilization began 6,000 years ago, but we build on top of ruins, and sometimes unknowingly on top of their ashes. Geologists have found soot layers in Earth's stratigraphy that don't correspond to known volcanic events, thin black lines, carbon-rich, suggesting intense fires, fires without forests, fires without war, fires without context. What burned, and when? The Silurian hypothesis reminds us to think not in terms of what we've found, but what could still be hidden. Not every ruin is made of stone. Not every trace survives in form. Some survive only in distortion, in isotopes, in symbols, in myths. What if the Risha is not a city, but a scar, or a fingerprint, or an invitation? And what if those who came before left messages we cannot yet read, because we have not yet remembered how to look? Perhaps the earth is not trying to forget. Perhaps it is waiting to be asked the right question. And so we return to the desert's edge and we listen. Not for words, but for absences, for alignments, for patterns that shouldn't be. The sands are not empty. They are heavy with memory. But memory without context is indistinguishable from myth, so we must become myth readers, dream interpreters, archaeologists of the impossible. Because the moment we declare something impossible, we close the door on discovery. And perhaps that is how the cycle repeats, each new civilization believing it is the first, each new map drawn atop the ashes of the last. So tonight, we gaze into the eye of the Sahara, not as tourists, not as skeptics, but as listeners. And we ask, if Atlantis was only the echo, then what was the original voice? In the shadowed lands of modern-day Iraq, long before empires carved laws into stone or kings declared their dominion in tablets, the floodplains of the Tigris and Euphrates cradled the cradle of civilization, or so we are told. Sumer, the first writing, the first cities, the first record of anything that calls itself human. And yet, even in Sumer's oldest clay, a strange whisper lingers, not from the kings, but from the gods they claimed to serve. The Sumerian spoke of beings called the Anana, those who came from the heavens and ruled before the flood, not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. In their myths, kingship descended from the sky. And before the first human kings reigned in Eridu, there were 10 rulers, 10 antediluvian kings, whose reigns lasted not years, but tens of thousands of years. Alulim of Eridu, they say, ruled for 28,800 years, Dumuzid the shepherd for 36,000. These numbers are dismissed as symbolic. But the Sumerians etched them into clay. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Why record the impossible so carefully? We are told it's myth. But what if it's memory? Deformed by time, filtered through generations, turned sacred not because it was imagined, but because it was never understood? What if the gods were not gods, but survivors? Survivors of something before, something old, something lost. Beneath the ruins of Eridu, archaeologists found 13 layers of occupation, stacked one upon the other like sedimentary dreams. The lowest layers predate the known rise of Sumer by centuries, maybe more. Primitive structures, yes, but too organized, too aligned to dismiss entirely. And in these layers, the earliest symbols appear. Not language yet, but intent, the shape of thought, the beginning of record. But what was being recorded? Across the Fertile Crescent, symbols repeat, stars with wings, serpents intertwined, eyes radiating light. Always the same shapes, drawn by hands that never met. Babylon, Assyria. Even in distant Anatolia at Göbekli Tepe, the same motifs persist. Animals in unnatural poses, cosmic alignments, anthropomorphic figures with hands folded neatly before them. Guardians, perhaps, or witnesses. In temple after temple, the theme returns. Something once ruled the earth. Something that knew the stars. something that fell, and always, beneath it all, the flood. It is one of the oldest and most universal myths in human memory. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from the Bible to the Mahabharata, from Inuit tales to Australian Aboriginal songs, every culture remembers a flood, a great drowning, a restart. Why? What is it we are all trying not to forget? The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, the survivor. The man warned of the flood, who built a vessel, who carried knowledge forward through the deluge. The Sumerians call it the Deluge Tablet, and it reads not as fable, but as chronology. A timeline, a sequence of events so old it predates language itself. If the flood was real, and there is geological evidence to suggest that massive floods did occur at the end of the last ice age, triggered by glacial melt and shifting seas, then what was washed away? Not just villages, not just myths, but memory. The Silurian Hypothesis points to the deep past, the Paleocene, the Eocene, eras tens of millions of years before Homo sapiens. But what if we don't need to go back that far to lose a civilization? What if 12,000 years is enough? The Younger Dryas period, a sudden and violent climate shift, occurred roughly 12,900 years ago. In a matter of decades, the Earth plunged into an unnatural cold. Megafauna died, sea levels surged, ecosystems collapsed. No one agrees on why. Comet impact, volcanic disruption, melting glaciers destabilizing ocean currents. But all agree, something changed, and afterward, the world was not the same. In this time of chaos, humanity's memory was rewritten. Myths were born, gods were named, and the few who remembered became legend. In Sumerian tradition, the gods taught humans how to build, how to plant, how to write. This is a theme echoed in Mesoamerican legends. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, brings knowledge. In Egypt, Thoth. In India, the Rishis. In Greece, Prometheus, always a figure who descends, always one who brings fire, always a price. But if fire is knowledge, who lit it first? Among the earliest cuneiform texts, some remain untranslated, not because they are damaged, but because their grammar follows no known pattern. They are dismissed as ritual nonsense or scribal errors. But some researchers believe they may represent an older substrate language, something inherited, not invented, a code beneath the clay. What if language itself is the last surviving technology of a forgotten age? Unlike stone, language evolves. It erodes at the edges, like coastlines under tide. But sometimes a root remains, a syllable, a sound, a god's name, a number. The Sumerian word for star is mul. The word appears across tablets, not just for celestial objects, but for divine ones. To name something with M-ul was to declare it not of this earth. But stars, too, are born, and they die. So we must ask, were these star beings ever here, or simply remembered? Tonight we return to the cradle of writing, not to worship, but to wonder. Not to decode the tablets, but to ask why they exist at all. Why writing began not as trade, not as law, but as memory, myth, invocation. Was it desperation, or was it warning? Perhaps the earliest writers were not inventing symbols, but recording what they could no longer understand. A language borrowed, a story inherited, a truth too large to survive untouched. And if so, then our alphabets are tombstones, and our myths are maps. Maps pointing not to heaven, but to what once stood before the flood. So we trace the symbols, we follow the riverbeds, we turn the clay in our hands and wonder, not what it says, but what it's trying not to lose. because perhaps the oldest question is not, who are we? But rather, whose place have we taken? In 1930, on the edge of an iron mine near London, Texas, not the city in England, but the quiet American town, workers cracked open a chunk of sedimentary rock dated to the Lower Cretaceous period, 100 million years old. Trapped inside was something inexplicable. A hammer, encased in stone, a tool with a wooden handle, partially turned to coal. A head of iron far purer than anything produced by known ancient metallurgy. It was, by every measure, an industrial object, but it should not exist. Geologists dismissed it as a concretion, a modern tool somehow encased in a rapid geological process, a quirk of nature, a joke of time. Yet the carbonized handle, the purity of the iron, the depth at which it was found, these details do not easily submit to such comfort. The object became a heresy, but the Earth has always been a heretic. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, whispers of out-of-place artifacts called ooparts surfaced in museum basements and forgotten journals. A spark plug embedded in a geode, machined spheres found in Precambrian strata, tiny metal spirals discovered in the Ural Mountains, some so small they could only have been crafted under magnification. They do not form a pattern. They do not form a story, but they form an irritation. A tension between what we think we know and what the Earth continues to yield. Most are ignored. Many are forgotten. Some are explained away with awkward theories, like time travelers or hoaxes, but that is not the point. The point is this: if a civilization had once reached technological heights long before us, how would its traces survive? The Silurian Hypothesis urges us to think not in terms of skyscrapers or satellites. These would not endure. Glass would shatter. Steel would rust. Circuits would dissolve. A few million years, and the forests return. The tectonic plates crush all beneath. But chemistry remembers. In the deep ocean sediments, anomalies exist. Carbon isotope ratios that suggest combustion on a massive scale. Spikes in heavy metals. Platinum, tungsten, at levels inexplicable by natural processes. Ancient coal seams oddly depleted of certain elements, as if burned before. These are not claims. They are questions. If an industrial age once bloomed and died in a forgotten epoch, what fingerprint would it leave? Perhaps only a layer, a whisper between rock and time. The fossil record is not complete. It is a lattice of luck. Soft bodies vanish. Dense bones survive. Of the billions of species that have lived on Earth, fewer than 1% are known to us. What of cultures? What of machines? Even Homo sapiens, should we vanish today, would leave behind little more than radioactive isotopes and plastic molecules, strata scars for future minds to find. So we must ask, if we found a cell phone fossilized in Jurassic stone, would we believe it? Or would we destroy it to protect the timeline? Perhaps the better question is this: what have we already destroyed? In 1844, in a quarry in Scotland, workers split a block of ancient stone and found inside a small metallic nail, perfectly straight, embedded in rock 60 million years old. It was reported, catalogued, and then disappeared. Again and again, the same pattern: anomaly, ridicule, erasure. But anomalies are the first breath of revelation. Not every artifact must be proof, but every artifact must be heard. The Vöcklinger Ironworks in Germany is a modern ruin. Abandoned just decades ago, it already looks ancient. Rusted steel, overgrown walls, forgotten purpose. Now imagine it untouched for 1 million years. 2 million. The pipes collapse, the concrete turns to dust, the iron returns to ore, and all that remains is the stain of change. What then would survive? Ceramics, perhaps, synthetic molecules, a few rare isotopes in the soil. The earth would swallow our cities whole. And one day, perhaps, strange beings would walk these hills, never knowing what lay beneath, unless they dared to ask. The hammer in Texas, the spheres in South Africa, the carbon anomaly in Greenland, each a discordant note, each an echo that does not fit the song. We do not know if these are misinterpretations or fragments of something far older than we dare imagine. But if even one of them is real, it is enough, because it would mean the story of Earth is not linear, not ours alone, that we are not the first to rise, not the first to burn, not the first to wonder, and maybe not the last to fall. The philosopher Nietzsche once wrote that time is a circle, eternally recurring. Perhaps civilizations, too, are circular. They bloom, they thrive, they vanish, they seed the next. But if that's true, what of legacy? Where's the library? Where are the monuments? Perhaps they lie not above, but below. Beneath the Amazon, LiDAR scans have revealed buried structures, grids, roads, geometric platforms, all beneath untouched jungle. Beneath Antarctica's ice, radar hints at mountains and caverns unmapped, and beneath the sediment of forgotten epochs, perhaps a memory. Not of humans, but of Earth itself. Because the Earth remembers. It remembers fire. It remembers flood. It remembers footsteps not yet acknowledged. And tonight we remember with it. We hold the hammer. We turn the stone. We ask not for belief, but for pause. Because once something stood here, and now only questions remain. If the fossil record is missing pages, then who wrote the parts we'll never read? Beneath the surface of the earth, deeper than bones and ruins, lies a record untouched by time's chaos. It does not speak in stone or steel. It whispers in sequences: adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, the alphabet of all life, DNA, and like all languages, it contains not just meaning, but memory. In 2013, geneticists mapping the genome of Homo sapiens discovered something strange. A segment of non-coding DNA, once considered junk, carried a sequence so exact, so structured, it did not behave like the chaotic drift of evolution. Some called it an anomaly. Others called it a signature. Embedded in our own genetic code was a mathematical pattern, a repeating sequence that mirrored the Fibonacci series, the golden ratio, and, disturbingly, binary logic. These sequences are not unique to humans. Some exist in archaea, ancient microorganisms billions of years old. How does a microbe, living before complex life, encode a language that echoes our own mathematics? It is not proof, it is not certainty, but it is suggestion. Some researchers, quietly, in academic corners, have proposed the idea that DNA itself may carry intentional signals, not of alien design, but of terrestrial intelligence far older than us. Intelligence that may have understood that ruins vanish, but genes persist. If you wanted to send a message across time, not decades, not millennia, but eons, where would you place it? Not in pyramids, not in texts, but in biology, in replication, in the invisible. Perhaps we are not the message. Perhaps we are the medium. In the 1970s, Soviet scientists hypothesized a concept called biological SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, not through space, but through life. Their logic was simple. Civilizations might die, but DNA spreads. It multiplies. It evolves. Yes, but not always randomly. Some sequences are strangely resistant to change. Evolution favors flexibility, but certain structures endure unreasonably. Why? One possibility? Preservation. Preservation of what? An idea? A blueprint? A seed? And suddenly, the Silurian Hypothesis expands, not just to civilizations that built towers or machines, but ones that transcended both. A civilization that, facing extinction, didn't bury its knowledge in vaults, but wove it into the very machinery of life. Not gods, not aliens, but ancestors. Unfathomably distant, unfathomably precise. There is precedent, even in our brief existence. In 2012, scientists at Harvard encoded a digital book into DNA, 53,000 words, images, even JavaScript code, stored in a strand no larger than a grain of salt. It worked. It can be copied endlessly. Preserved in cold, dry conditions, it could survive for 1 million years. Now imagine doing that 100 million years ago. Not to save stories, but to survive yourself. In Hindu philosophy, there is a concept called smriti, that which is remembered, memory as sacred, eternal. There is also shruti, that which is heard, divine transmission. Perhaps what we call instinct, or déjà vu, or spiritual awakening, is something older, something remembered not from our lives, but from the code we carry. Animals migrate with no map. Insects build with no teacher. Humans look up at the stars and feel homesick. Why? What longing echoes through our chromosomes? In 1997, researchers studying the junk DNA regions of the human genome found sequences repeating in patterns too orderly to be accidental. Some mirrored ancient syllabic scripts. Others followed linguistic structures, like a grammar hidden in flesh. These findings were dismissed. Too fringe, too risky to publish in major journals, but they linger. Because the idea itself cannot be unthought, that somewhere inside us is not only the story of what we are, but who came before. The biological clock of Earth keeps rhythm in more than fossils. It pulses through blood, through breath, through every seed and cell and song. Even Carl Sagan once mused that DNA may be the most logical place for an ancient species to preserve its memory. A message in a bottle, but not tossed into the sea, tossed into time. We have not yet decoded this message. We do not even know if there is one. But the patterns are there, the symmetry, the intent, and the silence, always the silence. If something placed itself within us, some fragment, some voice, how would we hear it? Dreams, perhaps, visions, the shiver we feel when standing among ancient ruins, the feeling that something once happened here, something not remembered, but known. The philosopher Jung called it the collective unconscious, archetypes that persist across culture, across time. The mother, the flood, the fall, the fire, images that reappear not because we teach them, but because we carry them, encoded, transmitted, lived again, in every generation. So perhaps the ancient ones did not leave monuments. Perhaps they left fingerprints inside the body. Perhaps their tomb is not beneath the sea, but beneath our skin. And if so, what do they want us to remember? Perhaps it is not their knowledge. Perhaps it is their failure. Perhaps we were not meant to worship them, or replicate them, or build their cities again. Perhaps we were meant to listen to their warning, because if they encoded their memory into life itself, then they were not gods. They were desperate, and what they feared is what we are now becoming. So tonight, when you dream, when your mind wanders through strange ancestral halls, listen for the pattern, not the voice, not the face, the rhythm, the symmetry, the message in the molecule. Because if we are not the first, then perhaps we are the answer, or the experiment, or the last echo of a species that once looked in the mirror and whispered, "We must not be forgotten." High in the Andean mountains of Peru, among the wind-swept plains of Nazca, there stretches a landscape not carved by nature, but drawn, etched into the desert floor with lines so vast they can only be fully seen from the sky. Lines, spirals, perfect geometric forms, animals in motion, a hummingbird with a wingspan wider than a football field, a spider that mirrors an ancient and obscure species only visible under magnification. And pathways, long, straight, unwavering, cut into the earth like a code meant for the stars. For centuries, the Nazca lines have stood in silence, visible only from above. To whom were they meant to be seen? Mainstream archaeology calls them ritual pathways, drawn by the Nazca people around 500 BCE, but there are problems. The lines are made in such a way that walking them would destroy them. The figures are too precise, their proportions too exact to be drawn without aerial assistance, and some of them stretch for miles, perfectly straight. Were they offerings to the gods? Or were they something else? A map, a signal, or a memory, copied from an older knowledge, the source of which even the Nazca themselves had forgotten? Because the Nazca are not the only ones who drew for the heavens. In England, the Uffington white horse gallops across a chalk hill. In the American Southwest, the Hopi drew giant kachinas, star beings on canyon walls. In the Australian outback, the Aboriginal dreaming tracks connect sky constellations with the Earth in ways that mirror quantum entanglement more than cartography. Across time and across cultures, humans have looked upward and then drawn downward. Why? The Silurian Hypothesis invites us to rethink what sky worship really was. Not just reverence for the sun and moon, but perhaps remembrance. Perhaps the sky holds not gods, but coordinates. In Bolivia, at an ancient ruin called Tiwanaku, there is a monolithic structure known as the Gate of the Sun. Carved with unearthly precision from a single block of stone, it features an intricate depiction of Viracocha, the god who came after a flood, who brought knowledge and then vanished. Around him are figures, each with a different facial expression, lined in rows that researchers say may be a star calendar, tracking not just solar movement, but complex celestial cycles lasting thousands of years. One of these cycles, the precession of the equinoxes, takes over 25,000 years to complete. To observe it requires knowledge passed across many lifetimes, or memory that spans epochs. Why would a civilization track something it could never witness in a single lifespan? Unless it wasn't their first time. The sky is a clock, and ancient people watched it obsessively. At Göbekli Tepe, at Stonehenge, at Nabta Playa, across continents, early humans oriented stone to stars. But why? Survival? Symbolism? Or remembrance? Consider this. The Earth's axis wobbles, slowly, predictably, over thousands of years. This means that over millennia, the position of stars in the sky changes, and yet, ancient structures around the world are aligned to star positions not visible during the era they were supposedly built. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns with Orion's belt, but perfectly, as it would have appeared around 10,500 BCE. The Sphinx, weathered not just by sand but by water, faces east, directly toward the rising sun during the spring equinox, 12,000 years ago. These alignments are not random, they are precise, intentional. But if the monuments were built later, How did the builders know where the stars had been? And if they were built earlier, who built them? What if the sky was not just a clock, but a compass? In 2012, scientists discovered an ancient artifact in Germany known as the Nebra sky disk, a bronze circle inlaid with gold symbols, sun, moon, stars, dating back over 3,600 years. It is the oldest known representation of the cosmos in human history. It even accounts for the Pleiades star cluster. But the Pleiades are not unique to Europe. They appear in nearly every ancient cosmology. The Japanese call them Subaru. The Greeks saw them as the Seven Sisters. The Cherokee say they were children who danced into the sky. The Aboriginal Australians say they are women chased by a man who appears as Orion. This global convergence on one specific star cluster is startling. Why the Pleiades? Why are they remembered everywhere? Some say it's because they are visible with the naked eye. But others wonder if we are remembering something once taught, something once known, something once seen from above. The Dogon people of Mali speak of beings from the star Sirius B, an invisible white dwarf not discovered by modern astronomy until the 20th century. Yet the Dogon described its orbit, density, and companion stars with eerie accuracy. How? Anthropologists dismissed it as coincidence or contamination from outside influence. But what if it isn't? What if ancient sky knowledge is not myth, but inheritance? In the spirals carved on Irish stones, in the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, in the calendars of the Maya, we see the same intent. Track the heavens. Remember the patterns. Don't forget the sky. But what happens when the sky forgets you? Earth's orbit is not fixed. It wobbles, tilts, changes. The sky above us is not the same sky that shone down on the dinosaurs. And one day, it will not be the same sky that shines on those who come after us. So perhaps ancient civilizations did not worship the stars, but recorded their fall through them. Because if you knew your world would be erased, if you knew your cities would turn to sand, would you not carve your story into the only thing that cannot burn? Would you not draw your memories across the face of heaven? And would you not teach those who came after, not through language, not through war, but through light? The lines in Nazca may never be decoded. The gate of the sun may remain unopened. But perhaps they were never meant to be understood by the mind. Perhaps they were meant to awaken something else, a feeling, a recognition. A quiet moment beneath the stars where, for just a breath, you remember something you never lived. And in that moment, you ask not what the sky is, but what it has forgotten. If the stars are maps, then where do they lead us back to? In 1900, off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera, sponge divers searching the ocean floor stumbled upon a shipwreck buried beneath centuries of coral and silence. Among the statues, amphora, and bronze fragments, they recovered a strange object, small, encrusted, seemingly unremarkable. It would take over half a century before someone understood what it truly was. The Antikythera mechanism. A machine. Not a metaphor, not a tool. A gear-based analog computer, capable of predicting eclipses, modeling planetary positions, and calculating lunar phases with breathtaking precision. Built over 2,000 years ago. It shattered everything we thought we knew about ancient technology. For centuries, we believed such complexity didn't exist until the Renaissance. Yet here was a device as intricate as a 19th century clock, made with bronze gears thinner than a fingernail, engineered with tolerances that should have been impossible for its time. And the true mystery? It wasn't alone. No one builds a single machine in a vacuum. The Antikythera mechanism must have had predecessors, prototypes, a tradition of knowledge behind it. But where are they? Lost? Hidden? Or perhaps not from this age at all? It is not proof of an ancient, lost civilization. But it is something harder to ignore. A technological ghost. A whisper of mechanics where no such whisper should be. So we must ask, what else lies forgotten? Not because it is impossible, but because we are not yet ready to accept it. There are older machines still. At the site of Hierapolis in modern-day Turkey lies the plutonium, a cave once believed to be a gate to the underworld. Priests would lead animals to its entrance, and they would die instantly. Birds flying overhead would drop mid-air. But the priests, they emerged unharmed. For centuries, it was myth. Then geologists examined it. A vent beneath the cave releases toxic carbon dioxide in high concentrations, deadly at low elevations, but dissipating quickly above waist height. The priests, standing tall, survived. The animals, closer to the ground, did not. Science explained the mystery. But the greater mystery remains. How did the ancients know? And not just here. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat's alignment marks solstices with impossible accuracy. In India, the iron pillar of Delhi has withstood corrosion for over 1,000 years, an alloy formulation that modern metallurgy still struggles to replicate. In China, Han Dynasty seismographs could detect earthquakes hundreds of miles away. Were these anomalies of genius, or echoes of a forgotten science? The Silurian Hypothesis teaches us that knowledge may arise, vanish, and arise again, not in a straight line, but in ripples. Civilizations may rediscover what was once lost. But how do we know whether a discovery is new or remembered? In a cave in South Africa, known as the Apollo 11 cave, archaeologists found stone slabs painted with geometric forms, grids, intersecting lines, nested spirals. They date back 25,000 years. Far older than writing, older than agriculture. But not random. What were these forms? Art, maps, or diagrams? And here, the spiral of possibility tightens. If an ancient civilization had once developed machinery, if they had built with metals, carved with precision, understood the wheel, the gear, the code, how much would remain? Bronze decays, steel rusts, but stone remembers. And sometimes what we call temples may not be temples at all. Take Puma Punku, a site near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. There, enormous stone blocks lie scattered, some weighing over 100 tons, carved with edges so sharp, corners so perfect, that modern stonemasons struggle to replicate them. Interlocking grooves, drill holes, geometries that do not feel ritualistic, but mechanical. Machines require parts, assemblies, modules. What if these stones were not sacred? What if they were components? The ancients, we are told, built without metal tools, without wheels, without the pulley. And yet, the evidence of their skill defies even our present explanations. Perhaps it is time to entertain a more radical idea, that these civilizations were not primitive, but survivors, that they inherited ruins, that they reoccupied machines they no longer understood. Imagine walking into a cathedral thousands of years after the culture that built it has vanished. You don't know its function. You don't speak its language, but you feel its shape, its power, its echo. So you call it a temple. You worship it, not knowing it was once a generator, a laboratory, a machine. In the Mahabharata, an ancient Indian epic, There are descriptions of flying vehicles, vimanas, capable of emitting beams of fire, causing massive destruction, even traveling between cities and stars. They are dismissed as mythology, symbolism, but the details are too precise. The texts describe propulsion systems, flight trajectories, aerial battles. Is this poetic metaphor? Or are we remembering machines through the lens of myth? In 2010, an aerospace engineer named Dr. Shivkar Bapuji Talpade claimed to have recreated a flying machine based on ancient Sanskrit texts. His design was rejected by the mainstream. Unverifiable, unacceptable. But again, we ask, why do so many myths remember machines? Did we dream them, or did we lose them? The Silurian Hypothesis reminds us that evidence of an ancient technological civilization would be subtle. A few anomalies in sediment, a few irregular isotope ratios, a few machines too advanced for their time. It would not be a city standing in the jungle. It would be a mechanism, corroded, fragmented, unexplainable, like the Antikythera device, like the iron pillar, like the forgotten gears of time itself. So we look again at the machine in the cave, not just as a marvel, not just as a miracle, but as a memory. Because perhaps the earth doesn't bury its past in stone. Perhaps it buries it in function, in machines that no longer run, in temples that once turned, in ruins that once remembered. If we found a machine 1,000,000 years old, would we even recognize it as a machine? There are symbols older than speech. In the Chauvet Cave of France, beneath layers of calcite and silence, hands once reached out to stone with pigment and firelight. On the cave walls, paintings not of chaos but of intention. Horses mid-gallop, lions hunting, a rhinoceros with horns, and among them abstract shapes, dots, spirals, zigzags, lattices. These marks are 36,000 years old, and they are not random. They appear again in caves across the globe, in El Castillo, Spain, in Sulawesi, Indonesia, in Maros, in Australia, the same marks, the same codes, repeating. Across continents that had no contact, across cultures that had not yet spoken. What were they trying to say? Some call it proto-writing, a pre-language of the visual mind. But what if it is something more primal? What if it was not an attempt to speak, but to remember? Not thoughts, but visions. Because language, as we know it, is linear, one word after another, a thread. But these symbols, these gestures in charcoal and ochre, do not unfold. They radiate, they echo, they feel not written, but retrieved. And what if the symbols were not invented by humans? What if they were inherited? Across ancient cultures, we find glyphs that defy locality. The swastika, long before its modern corruption, appears in India, in ancient Troy, among Native American tribes, and even etched into megalithic stones in Ireland. The spiral, too, the triskel, the twin serpents, the eye, they recur, independent of geography, independent of language. They feel inevitable, as if remembered from something before. Carl Jung called these archetypes, primordial symbols embedded in the collective unconscious. But what if they are more than psychological relics? What if they are the broken letters of a language once whole? A language not spoken, but seen. Consider the Vinca symbols, etched into pottery fragments in the Balkans over 7,000 years ago. They predate Sumerian cuneiform. They resemble no known script, and yet they persist in pattern, structured, repeating, suggesting meaning but refusing translation. Archaeologists hesitate to call it writing, because writing implies civilization, and civilization, we are told, had not yet begun. But perhaps it had ended. And what we found were fragments, like a child finding a gear in the forest, not knowing what machine it once belonged to. The oldest known written language, Sumerian, emerges fully formed, not slowly evolved, not gradually refined. It appears like a structure already complete. Its earliest tablets are not childish scrawls, but administrative records, star charts, myths. There is no Proto-Sumerian, only Sumerian. And then, silence. The same is true for Egyptian hieroglyphs. Their complexity at origin defies the idea of gradual development. What if they weren't inventions, but adaptations? What if these languages were the salvaged limbs of a linguistic titan now lost beneath the sands? The Mayans spoke of glyphs that were taught to them, not created. By the gods, by the sky people. Their codices speak of cycles, not years, but worlds, of ages that rise and fall, of language that comes and goes, not forgotten, retired, and again, the spiral appears. Language as spiral, history as spiral, memory looping, folding, dissolving, and returning. In the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro, tablets of the Indus Valley civilization remain undeciphered, thousands of them. And the symbols? Unlike any language we've ever known. No Rosetta Stone, no translation, just symbols, human, animal, geometric, staring back at us across 4,000 years. Some researchers suggest the symbols are not phonetic at all, that they represent thought directly, not sounds, but concepts, not language, but mind. And if so, then what we've found is not a script, but a consciousness, a way of thinking no longer ours, a way of thinking remembered only in dream. Because dreams too speak in symbol, not grammar, not sentence, but image. We dream of falling, of flying, of light that sings, of doors we cannot open, of voices that echo without words. These dreams are not modern, they are ancient, they are shared. Perhaps they are not ours, perhaps they are fragments of another memory, a language the earth once spoke through its children. We often assume that language progresses, that complexity increases. But what if we are devolving? What if we once spoke in light, in math, in vibration, in pure idea, and we have narrowed it to mouth sounds and ink scratches? What if language is not evolving? What if it is shrinking? The Dogon people of Mali say that language was a gift, a seed planted by the Nomo, beings from Sirius, not aliens, not gods, but ancestors, teachers. They brought symbols of water, sound, and vibration. They taught how to make sound into shape, sound into structure. The Sanskrit word akasha means ether, the substance of memory. It was believed that all sounds, all thoughts, all histories are recorded in the akashic field, not written, not spoken, felt. Perhaps the symbols in the caves are not recordings. Perhaps they are re-access points, nodes of resonance, like chords struck across time. The ancients did not write to communicate. They wrote to remember, because something had been lost, and they were trying not to rebuild it, but to hold on to its shadow. In 2002, scientists discovered that certain frequencies of sound can create complex geometric patterns in fine dust and water called cymatics. Ancient symbols, mandalas, yantras, runes, reappear naturally when the correct tone is struck. The implication? That language may not be abstract at all, that it is physical, that it is universal, that it is not invented but revealed. So what if the first language was not words? What if it was resonance? What if it was vibration encoded into stone, into symbol, into structure, so that one day, when we finally struck the same tone again, it would awaken? Not meaning, but memory. And perhaps that's what the ancients were trying to do, not to speak, but to sing the world back into balance. Because if a civilization were to fall, if all else were lost, the final hope would not be a book, or a statue, or even a city. It would be a language that could not die, a language that waits and whispers and returns when the silence is deep enough to hear it again. If we are trying to learn how to speak, what if we should be learning how to remember? In 1908, deep in the Siberian wilderness near the Podkamennaya Tunguska River, the sky ignited. At 7:17 a.m., witnesses from hundreds of miles away saw a flash brighter than the sun, followed by a shockwave that flattened over 80 million trees across 800 square miles. Herds of reindeer perished. The ground quaked. Windows shattered in towns hundreds of kilometers distant. But there was no crater, no impact, no meteorite. The Tunguska event remains one of the greatest unsolved explosions in human history. Mainstream science posits it was an airburst, a comet or asteroid that detonated before touching the ground, a natural cosmic event. But others have wondered, what really happened that morning? Because the forest did not burn evenly. Some trees, at the center of the blast, remained upright, stripped of branches but standing like blackened sentinels, and the area remained mysteriously radioactive for years, long before human nuclear activity. There is no definitive answer, only data and echoes. Ancient cultures across the world tell of fire from the sky. In the Rig Veda, the god Indra slays a dragon with a thunderbolt that burns the forests. The Hopi speak of a day when the sky fell. Aboriginal stories tell of fiery serpents descending, reshaping the land. Are these metaphors or memories? If an ancient civilization reached a level of technology capable of shaping energy, could they also have known destruction? If a war, a test, or a failure occurred tens of thousands of years ago, would it look much different than Tunguska? Some theorists, uncomfortable with the randomness of the event, suggested Tunguska was not natural at all, but an ancient energy weapon, detonated either accidentally or deliberately. Ludicrous, perhaps, but the evidence resists closure. Nikola Tesla, years earlier, claimed he had developed a method of wireless energy transmission capable of splitting the Earth like an apple. He spoke of remote power, resonant frequencies, and focused energy beams. Few took him seriously, and yet he disappeared into silence after a sudden withdrawal of funding. Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, designed to send energy without wires, was never completed. Its true function remains speculative, but if such a device had once worked, what would it have looked like from afar? A tower, a pulse, and then fire from heaven. It sounds like science fiction. But what if it's not? The Silurian Hypothesis asks us to discard the linearity of progress. If technology once rose and fell in deep time, then events like Tunguska might not be isolated. They might be echoes. Warnings. In 1945, at the Trinity site in New Mexico, humans detonated their first atomic bomb. The sand beneath turned to green glass, trinitite. Temperatures reached over 10,000 degrees Celsius. A new age began. But trinitite is not unique to 1945. In the deserts of Libya, vast stretches of yellow-green fused glass cover the ground. Libyan desert glass. It is older than the pyramids. No volcano explains it. No meteor crater surrounds it. And in Mohenjo-Daro, an Indus Valley city over 4,000 years old, archaeologists found skeletons lying hand in hand in the streets, some with radiation levels inexplicably high. The city itself shows signs of sudden incineration. Buildings melted, walls vitrified. What could do that? Some say asteroid, others say sunstorm. A few whisper something else, a weapon, not modern, not alien, but ancient, earthborn, forgotten. The Mahabharata describes a weapon called the Brahmastra, a device said to unleash fire brighter than 1,000 suns, with winds that scorched the skin, waters that boiled, unborn children that died in the womb. It speaks of mushroom-shaped clouds, of metal chariots flying in war. Symbolism, say the scholars. But symbols do not melt cities, and so we begin to wonder, what if Tunguska was not the first, but the last? A reactivation, a remnant, or a recurrence. Even now, in our modern world, we are discovering energy we cannot fully explain. Ball lightning, gamma-ray bursts, electromagnetic pulses from the Earth itself, known as Schumann resonances, capable of affecting biology and consciousness. Could it be that ancient civilizations once harnessed these energies? Not with wires, but with resonance. Not with combustion, but with frequency. Ancient structures like the Great Pyramid show acoustic properties, resonating chambers, tuned to specific Hertz frequencies. The hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, carved into limestone over 5,000 years ago, amplifies sound at 111 Hertz, a frequency shown to affect human brain states. Was it a temple? Or a frequency generator? An energy chamber? A memory amplifier? The ancients may have understood energy not as force, but as harmony, a language of vibration, tuning the earth, the body, the sky. And perhaps, at some point, something fell out of tune. Tunguska may have been an accident, or an echo, or a reminder, because the fire from heaven does not only destroy, it purifies, it resets, it closes the book, and begins again. But what if we're nearing that point once more? Our skies are filled with satellites, our oceans ripple with sonar, our earth vibrates with machines. We are reawakening energies we do not yet comprehend. And the ancient scars, the vitrified stones, the green glass, the blackened trees, may be more than ruins. They may be signs, coordinates, warnings, a silent chorus singing, "You've been here before," and perhaps, just perhaps, Tunguska was not a catastrophe at all. Perhaps it was a response, an immune reaction from a planet that remembers what civilization once unleashed. Or perhaps it was an opening, a crack in the veil. Because if the sky has fallen once, it can fall again. And the fire it brings is not judgment, it is memory. So tonight we stand beneath that same sky, we look up, and we wonder, not if we are alone, but if we are safe. Because somewhere the air still holds the echo of a flame we did not start, and may not be able to stop. If fire was once the end, will it also be the beginning? Far to the south, where the earth exhales nothing but cold and memory, lies the last true mystery of this world, Antarctica. A continent buried not in sand or forest, but in silence, ice as old as time, wind that speaks in tongues only glaciers understand. But it wasn't always this way. Beneath miles of frozen stillness, radar scans have revealed something the world wasn't meant to find, a landscape that should not exist. In 1958, during the International Geophysical Year, seismic readings pierced through Antarctica's surface. What returned was astonishing. Valleys, rivers, mountain ranges, and, beneath the ice sheet, a circular formation 300 miles across, perfectly symmetrical, buried beneath Wilkes Land. Some say it is a crater, others a dome. But there is no ejecta, no asteroid fragments, only gravitational anomalies, only geometry, a silence. Shaped. The Wilkes Land. Anomaly defies natural explanation. Its magnetic field is irregular. Its heat signature lingers in ways no glacier should sustain. And beneath it, something massive, something metallic. And we are not allowed to dig. Satellite imagery of the Antarctic region is frequently blurred or redacted. Expeditions are limited. Military treaties prohibit unauthorized excavation. For a continent supposedly barren and empty, it is strangely protected. Why? Could it be the ice is not hiding something from us, but hiding us from something? Ancient maps tell a stranger story. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, depicts the coastline of Antarctica, without ice. Mountains, rivers, inlets, drawn centuries before the continent was officially discovered. More unsettling, the features match what modern satellite scans have revealed beneath the ice sheet. How did a 16th century mapmaker know what lay under frozen miles? Some say he copied from older sources, maps passed down from Alexandria, from Babylon, from somewhere before. But what civilization had the capability to chart an ice-free Antarctica? And when? Geologists agree. The last time Antarctica was ice-free was over 12 million years ago. If the Piri Reis map is even remotely accurate, it suggests knowledge far older than history can tolerate. The Silurian Hypothesis whispers again. If a civilization had once spread across the Earth, before us, long before, Antarctica would have been a final refuge, isolated, remote, preserved, perhaps not a place of origin, but of memory. The perfect vault. In 1994, Russian scientists drilling into Lake Vostok, a subglacial lake sealed for over 20 million years, encountered magnetic anomalies. Their instruments failed, their recordings cut out. Then, silence. They resurfaced, and nothing further was shared. Rumors followed of microbes unlike any known form of life, of strange structures detected beneath the lakebed, of a cavern filled with heat, light, and echoes. But the reports vanished, and the drilling stopped, not from technical failure, but from order. What sleeps beneath the ice? Not just fossils, not just bacteria, but time. Antarctica may be the last remaining memory chamber of Earth, a place where the past has not been rewritten by erosion, forest, or flood, only preserved, held in cryostasis. We imagine lost civilizations as buried in desert or drowned in ocean, but the ice buries more thoroughly than either. It does not decay. It does not break. It holds, seals, protects, and perhaps imprisons. The myth of the Watchers, beings cast into darkness beneath the earth, is not unique to the Book of Enoch. In Sumer, they are the Anunnaki. In Greece, the Titans. In Norse myth, the Jötnar, sealed beneath ice, awaiting release. Why does every mythology place the old gods below, and frozen? Not in fire, not in storm, but in cold. What if these stories are not metaphor, but memory distorted through fear? What if something was buried, not because it died, but because it could not be allowed to live? In 2018, researchers detected an electromagnetic anomaly beneath the Antarctic ice, a signal, rhythmic, pulsing, not natural, not random, but it was not repeated, it was not explained, and it was not made public in any meaningful way. But it happened, and we forgot. The ancients may have known. Plato wrote of a continent at the edge of the world, beyond the pillars of Hercules, that held the last secret of a lost race. In Egyptian myth, Thoth fled to a land of white after the fall of Atlantis, to guard its knowledge until the stars returned to alignment. Maybe Antarctica is that white land. Maybe it is not empty. Maybe it is sleeping. And so we ask, If a civilization had one final message to send across epochs, one last truth to hide from destruction, where would they place it? Not in a temple, not in stone, but in a place no man could reach, a place where time cannot touch, a place like Antarctica. And perhaps, hidden beneath Wilkes Land, there is a vault, not filled with treasure, but with memory, a library not of books, but of frequency, geometry, light. And the key to that vault is not technology, it is awakening. When the poles shift, as they have before, the ice will melt, the layers will break, and what has been sealed will rise. Not in violence, not in fire, but in the slow uncoiling of a truth too heavy for one age to carry. So tonight we gaze toward the south, not with instruments, but with intuition. We listen for the silence beneath the cold. Because, perhaps, the ice does not hide the past, perhaps it preserves the future, and in that frozen future something waits to be remembered, something once loved, once lost, and never again spoken of. Until now. If the Earth has a memory, is Antarctica where it keeps its final secret? In the black forest of southwestern Germany, nestled between the mossy hills and ancient trees, there is a clock that does not chime. It does not tick. It does not mark the hour. It waits. It is not made of gears or hands, but of stone, memory, and mathematical alignment. And it is not the only one. All across the world, remnants of stone constructions, circular, aligned to the solstice, etched with glyphs, are called by many names: megaliths, calendars, observatories. But what if they are none of these? What if they are clocks, but not ones that count forward? What if they were designed to tell us when something ends? At Stonehenge, the summer solstice sunlight shines through the heel stone with surgical precision. At Chaco Canyon, the ancestral Puebloans marked the lunar standstill with shadow spirals etched into the rock. At Nabta Playa in Egypt, older than the pyramids, stone circles aligned with Orion's belt and the rising sun, as it was 7,000 years ago. But many of these sites also contain a different pattern, one not about the present, but about the reset, the end of cycles, the return, the long count. The Mayan calendar famously predicted an end in 2012, not of the world, but of a cycle. The end of a great cycle of 5,125 years, part of a much longer cosmic rhythm spanning over 26,000 years, the precession of the equinoxes. To track such a cycle is no small feat. It requires not just observation, but legacy, a handing down of knowledge over generations. Or perhaps the recovery of a memory once already known. The precession is caused by the Earth's axial wobble, a slow rotation that changes the orientation of our planet's tilt. Over thousands of years, this causes the stars to shift across the sky, the constellations to move, the calendar to fall out of sync. But why would the ancients care? Unless they remembered a time when this shift brought not just star changes, but cataclysm. Many ancient traditions speak of previous worlds, civilizations that rose and fell not once, but many times. The Hopi tell of 4 worlds. The Aztecs believed we live in the 5th sun. The Hindus speak of yugas, ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each descending in consciousness and harmony. The pattern is clear. Time does not move forward. It spirals, each rotation bringing back an echo of what came before. And the clocks, the megaliths, the pyramids, the calendar stones, they were never meant to count time as we do. They were warnings, alignment markers, countdown devices, not to doomsday, but to memory. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera, Egypt, features the famous zodiac of Dendera, a celestial chart carved in stone. It shows the 12 signs of the zodiac, but also something stranger, planetary alignments that only occur once every 26,000 years. This date is not mythological, it is astronomical, and it points to a truth ancient builders may have known, that cosmic alignments correspond to earthly transformations, magnetic shifts, climatic upheavals, civilizational resets. But how would they know? Unless they had seen it before. Unless they had counted back. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat is aligned not only to solar positions, but to the constellation Draco. Some researchers believe it reflects the stars as they appeared in 10,500 BCE, the same epoch mirrored in the alignment of the Giza pyramids. Why that date? Because that's when the last ice age ended, when glaciers melted, when sea levels rose hundreds of feet, when, according to myth, Atlantis fell. Atlantis, the civilization that Plato claimed existed 9,000 years before Solon, which would place it around 11,600 BCE, the exact beginning of the Younger Dryas melt period. Coincidence or convergence? The clocks count backward because the danger is not the future, it is the past repeating itself. And the only way to prepare for what comes again is to remember. Even now, in our modern age, we've begun to build our own clocks to reach beyond our lifetime. In the Texas desert, the Long Now Foundation has begun constructing a 10,000-year clock, designed to tick once a year, with a chime every millennium. It is an act of long-term thinking. But what if someone already built that clock? What if the pyramids were not tombs? What if they were pendulums, resonators, aligned to the stars not for glory, but for signal? Many megalithic sites emit low-frequency vibrations. Acoustic scientists have recorded deep, pulsing hums inside chambers like Newgrange, the Hypogeum of Malta, and the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Tones that can affect human consciousness. Brainwaves. Memory. Perhaps these sites were designed to be activated, not just by visitors, but by time itself, by alignment, by return. When the Earth reached a certain point in its orbit of the galaxy, something would awaken. A memory encoded in stone. A frequency waiting to be struck again, not to warn us, but to remind us who we were. Because what we call history is not a straight line. It is a spiral staircase, and with each revolution the air feels more familiar, the architecture more ancient, the echoes louder, and perhaps, as we ascend again, we begin to feel it. The clock, ticking beneath us, not forward, not back, but inward, toward the center, toward the moment when time, myth, memory, and matter collapse into one long exhale of recognition. The clocks are not counting down to destruction. They are counting down to remembrance. And as we reach the halfway point of our spiral, we must ask, what happens when we remember something we were never meant to forget? There is a desert in China, where the wind speaks in forgotten vowels, and the sand buries not only bones, but blueprints. In the vast stretch of the Taklamakan Desert, whose name means you go in and never come out, satellite images have revealed strange lines, geometric patterns, grid-like structures stretching for miles, lines too straight, too uniform, etched into a landscape that no longer has cities, nor memory of them. The Chinese government calls them military test ranges. Perhaps they are. Or perhaps they are echoes. Beneath the dunes lie the ruins of cities long lost, Nia, Lulan, and others, whose names have barely survived, whose walls were swallowed by sandstorms centuries ago. Their discovery, largely accidental, hints at something older than recorded Silk Road histories. A network, perhaps, of knowledge and trade. But deeper beneath, there are rumors of structures yet unnamed, patterns without language. In 2001, archaeologists uncovered mummies in the Tarim Basin, preserved by the dry desert air. They had blonde hair, tall frames, European features. Some wore woven tartan fabrics, and they predated the Chinese presence in the region by over 2,000 years. What were they doing there? No one knows. Some say they were migrants, others say survivors. But survivors of what? Throughout the world, ruins exist that have no name, not because we forgot them, but because we were never meant to know them in the first place. In the jungles of Guatemala, LiDAR scans have revealed over 60,000 structures, temples, roads, irrigation systems, hidden beneath centuries of overgrowth. An entire civilization, invisible to the naked eye. And yet, even that civilization may have been a layer upon an older one. Beneath the known Mayan sites, older stones rest, different cuts, different styles, different logic. What if each civilization is not the beginning, but the inheritance? In India, the temple at Ellora Caves, specifically the Kailasa Temple, is carved entirely from a single rock, chiseled downward from the cliff. No scaffolding, no separate pieces, just removal. Hundreds of thousands of tons of basalt carved away to reveal perfection. Mainstream estimates claim it took centuries, but no inscriptions record who began it. No plans survive. It simply exists, complete, monolithic, without precedent. And then, it was never built again. Not mimicked, not copied, not expanded. As if someone had once remembered how to do something, and then forgot. The city without a name is not just in deserts. It lives in our dreams. Many people across cultures report dreams of a vast, ancient city, flooded in golden light or blanketed in shadow. Its architecture varies, but the feeling remains: recognition. A place they've never been, but always known. A place that calls them by name, though they've forgotten how to answer. This phenomenon, known as archetypal recall, has been dismissed as collective fantasy. But what if it's not fantasy? What if it's memory, buried so deep it only surfaces in sleep? Carl Jung believed the psyche stores symbols like fossils, compressed in myth but echoing real events. What if some memories are not ours? What if they belong to a world before? And what if that world is beginning to remember itself through us? The concept of morphic resonance, introduced by biologist Rupert Sheldrake, suggests that memory is not held solely in brains, but in fields. That once something has occurred, once a pattern had been lived, it becomes easier to happen again. Not through genetics, not through record, but through resonance. So if a civilization had once achieved greatness, if it had built, reached, collapsed, then the blueprint of that cycle still vibrates, still pulls, still repeats. And perhaps we do not build our cities anew. Perhaps we rebuild them from whispers. Perhaps every new city is a reenactment of something older, like an actor repeating lines they never wrote. In Peru, the city of Cusco was built atop the foundations of an earlier city, one with stonework so precise that not even a razor blade can pass between the blocks. The Spanish marveled at it, then built their own architecture on top, less enduring, less true. The Inca said the stones were moved by sound, that they sang them into place. Myth? Perhaps. But the myth is always more honest than the history, because the myth remembers the impossible, and history only records the permitted. So we stand now in a world built atop ruins, not just of cities, but of ideas. And somewhere, maybe in the Taklamakan, maybe in the Amazon, maybe in the ice, we will find a city without a name. Its walls will not speak, its stones will not yield inscriptions, because it was not built to be known. It was built to be remembered, not by archaeologists, but by the soul. We may never find it on a map, but we may find it in silence, in dreams, in the places that feel sacred though no history names them. And when we do, we will not ask what it was called. We will ask, why does it feel like coming home? Because maybe we didn't lose the city. Maybe the city lost us. And now, it is calling us back. If a city leaves no name, no map, no language, but still waits, what does that say about who it was built for? In the ancient temple of Hippogeum, Malta, 40 feet beneath the surface of the earth, there is a chamber carved entirely in limestone, known only as the Oracle Room. It is a space of silence and shadow, polished by hands that have long since turned to dust. But speak a word here, just one, and the chamber responds. At 111 hertz, a voice spoken within its oval enclosure vibrates the entire structure. Not with volume, with resonance. The frequency is not random. It aligns with what neuroscientists call the cognitive frequency threshold, the point at which the brain transitions into a trance-like theta state. In other words, it induces altered consciousness. Whoever built this space understood not only sound, but how sound affects the human mind. No writings were found, no tools, no scaffolding, only a design, etched in stone, that transforms voice into experience. How? Mainstream archaeology labels it ritualistic. But what if it was technological? Not in the way we understand machines, but in the way the ancients understood nature. Sound is not just vibration, it is structure. It organizes matter. Cymatics, the science of visual sound, shows how specific tones can create intricate geometric patterns in sand, water, even metal. And those patterns? They mirror ancient symbols, yantras in Hinduism, mandalas in Buddhism, the flower of life, the Sri Yantra, all of them visible in cymatic tests when the right frequency is played. So the question becomes, were these sacred geometries invented or remembered? If an advanced civilization once existed, what would be left of its technology? Not wires, not glass, not plastic, but tone, resonance, the invisible language of form. In 1997, researchers testing the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid in Giza discovered that the granite walls amplify vibration at 432 hertz, a frequency long associated with healing, balance, and harmony in multiple traditions. Coincidence or continuity? The ancient Vedas spoke of Nada Brahma, the universe's sound. The Egyptians depicted Thoth speaking creation into existence. In Genesis, in the beginning was the Word. The Hopi described the first world as being sung into form. The Australian Aboriginal song lines describe how the land was spoken, sung into being by ancestral beings. These are not metaphors. They are memories, frequencies held not in data, but in ritual, in echo. Because sound doesn't die. It disperses. It moves outward. It embeds itself in matter, in behavior, in architecture. Pythagoras, the philosopher-mystic, believed the planets themselves emitted tones, a harmony of spheres. He taught that understanding the world meant hearing it, and that by playing certain instruments tuned to precise intervals, one could align the soul with the cosmos. Was he dreaming or remembering? Because across cultures, we find instruments tuned not for entertainment, but for resonance. Ancient flutes found in China, dating back over 9,000 years, are tuned to a pentatonic scale. The didgeridoo of Australia emits low-frequency drones that mimic Earth's natural resonant frequencies. The Tibetan singing bowls, the Gregorian chants, the temple bells of Japan, all tuned, all measured, all speaking a language we no longer understand. And when we ask why, they say, to awaken the gods. But perhaps the gods were not entities. Perhaps they were frequencies, states of mind, doors. And these instruments were not prayers. They were keys. The Silurian Hypothesis reminds us that the remnants of deep-time civilizations would be subtle, abstract, not computers or engines, but anomalies in climate, isotopes, mineral patterns, or sound. Because sound changes matter, researchers have shown that sound can levitate small objects, displace fluids, alter cell structure. The ancients may have used resonance to build, to heal, to remember. And when their age ended, they left behind not monuments, but tones. In the Andes, at Sacsayhuaman, the stone blocks are fit with such precision that not even air passes between them. The shapes are polygonal, earthquake-resistant. But some researchers noticed something else. When you whistle near certain angles, the walls sing back. Subtle echoes, harmonics, as if the stones remember the song they were built with. What if building was not mechanical, but musical? What if architecture was a form of echo containment? We often think of sound as fleeting. But in the ancient world view, sound was the root. Light moves faster, but it doesn't organize. Sound does. And perhaps it remembers. If a civilization once existed that understood resonance, not just in music, but in biology, geology, cosmology, what would it leave behind? Not skyscrapers, but chambers like the hypogeum, geometries that awaken when the right word is spoken. The right tone is struck, not for all ears, but for those ready to remember, because memory is not only held in neurons, it is held in rhythm, in breath, in the vibration of bones beneath the skin. This is why chant survives, why prayer is sung, why silence feels loud in sacred places. It is not belief, it is frequency. And maybe, just maybe, that's why some ancient sites make us weep for no reason, why some rooms feel like returning, why some tones make the skin remember something the brain cannot name. We call it awe, but perhaps it is recognition. Perhaps we once knew these sounds, not as worshippers, but as creators. And maybe the last song of that old world was not a cry of death, but a seed, sown in stone, waiting for someone, someday, to sing it again. So tonight we listen, not with ears, but with stillness, for the sound that never died, the one beneath all silence, the tone that knows your name before you speak it. If sound can shape matter, what memories might awaken when we learn to sing the ancient tones once more? In the early 20th century, deep within the South African earth, miners unearthed something unexpected. Small metallic spheres, perfectly round, etched with grooves that circled them like the equator of a planet. Some were solid, others hollow. Their age? According to geologists, the rock strata in which they were found dated to over 2.8 billion years old. These were not fossils, not bones, but objects that didn't belong. They became known as the Klerksdorp spheres, named after the region where they were discovered. And for decades, they sat quietly in museum drawers, sparking curiosity, then skepticism, then silence. Mainstream scientists called them concretions, natural formations formed under pressure, shaped by sediment. But no one could explain the grooves, the symmetry, the fact that they spin on their axis with such precision that they seem engineered. But engineered by whom? And when? They are not alone. In Russia's Ural Mountains, beneath the peat and frost, researchers found tiny spirals, metallic, often tungsten or molybdenum, some so small they required microscopes to see. They dated back tens of thousands of years, and their construction resembled modern nanotechnology. No explanation was given. The dig site was closed. We call these anomalies out-of-place artifacts, parts, because their very existence is a violation, a fracture, not in time, but in our story of time, because to admit them is to unravel the thread. To accept the Klerksdorp spheres is to ask whether something once knew how to craft at the level of physics, not metallurgy, not art, precision. And if so, we must ask, did they build machines? And where are the bones of those machines now? In 1972, in the Oklo region of Gabon, Africa, scientists discovered a uranium deposit behaving unlike any other. The ratio of uranium-235 was abnormally low, as if it had already been used in a controlled reaction. Further testing revealed that over 1 billion years ago, the site had functioned as a natural nuclear reactor. Water flowed in and out. Fission occurred. The reaction was stable, sustained, regulated. Naturally, some said. But others paused, because nothing about it was accidental. The spacing of the ore, the configuration of the surrounding rock, the moderation of neutrons by groundwater, all perfect. Nature can be elegant. But when elegance begins to resemble design, we must listen. Because if reactors existed before humans, if energy was once harvested not with fire, but with fusion, then we are not living at the peak of civilization. We are walking on its ashes. The Silurian Hypothesis prepares us for this unease. It tells us that time is not linear, that intelligence may rise and fall like breath, and that the signs left behind may not be buildings, but chemistry. A spike in heavy isotopes, a drop in carbon-13, an oddity in metal ratios. Clues not in myth, but in material. The bones of machines are not always steel. Sometimes they are minerals, altered under pressure. Sometimes they are scars in sediment. Sometimes they are not bones at all. But gaps, like the mysterious layer of iridium found across the globe, marking the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods. Most say it came from a meteorite, the same one that ended the age of dinosaurs. But what if it wasn't an impact? What if it was an accident? A reactor meltdown, a detonation, a civilization-ending event? Not from the sky, but from within. The dinosaurs died, but something else might have ended too. Not life, but memory. If we dug deep enough, not with shovels, but with honesty, what would we find? Would we find wires turned to dust? Circuits replaced by crystal? Would we find a chamber of polished stone, humming faintly with magnetism, unbroken after 100 million years? And would we know it was a machine? Or would we call it sacred? In the caves of Baia, Italy, near the Bay of Naples, lie structures older than the Roman Empire, rooms carved from rock that resonate in frequency-specific harmonics. Engineers studying them discovered that their acoustic properties mirrored those of modern sonic levitation labs. They called it coincidence. But how many coincidences form a pattern? In Peru, the Nazca lines resemble circuits. In India, the stepwells mirror fractals. In Tibet, mandalas follow sacred geometry that matches atomic lattice structures. We built them, yes. But did we invent them? Or recover them? There's a term in theoretical archaeology, technological regression. It describes cultures that inherit tools without understanding their origin. Cargo cults in the Pacific built airplane replicas from bamboo, hoping to summon gods who once brought steel and sugar. What if we are a cargo cult? What if the iPhone is not a marvel, but a reenactment? The bones of machines may not lie in museums. They may be buried in code, patterns repeated because they feel right, algorithms that resonate not because they're efficient, but because they're familiar, like a song we hum, not knowing why, because we heard it before, long before, in our bones, in the rocks, in the dust between stars. Some believe the Earth itself may be a machine. Gaia, not a metaphor for nature, but a system of feedback, of memory, of function. That tectonic plates, weather, magnetism, all part of a deeper structure. And if that is true, if the planet is a device, then who turned it on? And why? And when? So tonight, we reach not into myth, but into material. We hold the spheres. We trace the spirals. We read the isotopes like scripture, because the machines may be gone, but their bones remain, not to be worshipped, but to be remembered. Not because they offer power, but because they whisper a truth too old for speech, a truth buried not in soil, but in silence. If machines can die, what remains when even their memory turns to stone? There is a temple in Egypt whose walls glow with stories, but one carving in particular has stirred questions not easily silenced. Deep within the temple of Hathor at Dendera, an image rests, etched in stone, serene, ancient. It depicts a lotus flower, from which emerges a bulbous shape, elongated, curling at the top. Inside, a serpent winds upward. Alongside it, figures hold up what appear to be rods or cables. The carving, to some, resembles an ancient light bulb. Mainstream scholars insist it's symbolic, the Dendera light simply a mythological motif. The snake is divine energy. The bulb is the womb of creation. The rods, ceremonial. But others, electrical engineers, physicists, see something different. They see filaments, insulators, a closed-circuit design, and most disturbing of all, a schematic. Could it be that the ancients knew something more, something luminous? Across ancient structures, the question of light recurs, not only in myth, but in stone. How did the Egyptians carve intricate hieroglyphs in corridors deep within the pyramids, corridors with no soot, no torch marks? How did they paint vibrant colors in chambers sealed for thousands of years without evidence of flame? Theories abound. Mirrored light, sun tubes, but none explain it fully. So we ask, quietly, as all forbidden questions must begin, did they have light? If so, what kind? Not Edison's filament, not flame or oil, but something subtler. In the Baghdad Museum, before it was looted during the war, sat a small clay jar, 6 inches tall, sealed with asphalt, containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When replicas were made and filled with citrus solution, they produced electricity. The Baghdad battery, they called it, dismissed as a fluke, a coincidence, an ancient curiosity. But what if it wasn't a battery? What if it was a cell, not for power, but for memory, for light? The ancients spoke of sacred fire, of divine radiance. In the Vedic texts, Agni was not only fire, but intelligence. In Greece, Prometheus brought fire from the gods, a theft, punished. In Hebrew mysticism, Ein Sof is the endless light from which creation flows. We think of light as illumination. But in myth, light is revelation, a force that discloses truth, and maybe memory. If a civilization once knew how to harness this light, not for visibility, but for resonance, then perhaps their tools were not lost. They were misunderstood. In Tibet, monks chant beside crystal bowls said to carry the vibration of the soul. In ancient China, bronze mirrors were crafted so finely that their polished faces reflected images from their uncarved backs. The phenomenon, called magic mirrors, remains unexplained. The light reveals something invisible, something embedded. And in Peru, the golden sun disks of the Inca were said to hum when struck by light, not heat, sound, energy. We dismiss these stories as legend, but we've only recently begun to understand how light and vibration intertwine, how photons carry information, how light passed through crystal becomes organized, becomes memory. Fiber optics transmit our world, but the ancients may have used stone. Quartz resonates when electrically charged. It stores energy. It vibrates at measurable, stable frequencies. Our watches rely on it, our computers too. But what if they knew this? What if pyramids and ziggurats and monoliths were not simply tombs and temples, but optical devices? Not for worship, but for activation. Even now, certain Himalayan caves glow faintly with bluish light, where no source is visible. Geologists explain it as bioluminescence, but locals speak of the sky fire, a gift from the before time, when the stars spoke through stone. And here, the spiral tightens again, because light leaves a mark. In 2016, scientists discovered that high-frequency bursts, fast radio bursts, or FRBs, arriving from deep space contain repeating patterns. Some suspect they are natural, others that they are beacons. But what if we've already done the same? What if a civilization once sent its knowledge, not into orbit, not onto tablets, but into stone itself? Light encoded, frequency locked, waiting for the moment when the next species reached the right threshold, technologically, spiritually, acoustically, to activate the record, to awaken the archive. Maybe it's not buried, maybe it's all around us, but only visible in the right light. The ancients built for eternity, not because they feared time, but because they understood it. And what survives best? Not metal, not clay, but stone, silicon, crystal, memory. In the Book of Enoch, it is said the Watchers, those who came before, taught humans the art of metal, medicine, and light. And for this, they were cast into darkness, not because they were evil, but because they shared the forbidden. Perhaps they were not gods, but remnants, relics of a prior cycle, not rulers, but witnesses, trying to preserve something they themselves had once forgotten. Because light is not only clarity, it is code, encoded in myth, in sculpture, in glyphs glowing faintly on limestone walls, waiting for a beam, a voice, a vibration to trigger their message again. So tonight, we walk not with torches, but with questions. We stand in the oracle room. We face the Dendera light. We trace the Baghdad jar with reverent fingertips, and we wonder, not what they meant, but what they remembered. Because maybe they didn't invent these things. Maybe they were trying to rebuild them. Maybe just like us. They were remembering a light that had once fallen silent, but never gone out. And maybe now, in this age of reawakening, that light is beginning to glow again. Not in our eyes, but in our bones. If light is a message, what happens when we finally learn how to read it? In the heart of Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, the supposed cradle of civilization, there lies a puzzle older than kings. Before the Epic of Gilgamesh, before Hammurabi's code, before even the ziggurats rose like stairways to the gods, there were the Sumerians. And what they left behind, does not feel like a beginning. It feels like a continuation. Sumer appears suddenly in the archaeological record around 4000 BCE, with no apparent prelude, with cities, with astronomy, with irrigation systems, with written law, with geometry and metallurgy, with myths so old they speak of the time before time. Where did they come from? Their own texts do not claim invention. They speak of a legacy, of kingship descending from the heavens, of knowledge brought by the Anuna, of instructions given, not discovered. And the most unsettling part? The instructions seem to follow a pattern. In Eridu, Uruk, Nippur, and Lagash, the layout of the cities shows a strange consistency, proportions based not only on practicality, but cosmic alignment. The temples face cardinal points. The inner sanctums echo mathematical ratios. Pi, phi, the square root of 2. These are not random artifacts of intuition. These are fingerprints, design embedded in dust. But design from whom? The Silurian Hypothesis asks us to explore what could remain of a lost technological civilization. If it had existed, perhaps millions of years before us, what traces would survive? One possibility is architecture. Not just structures, but the logic beneath them. In Egypt, the dimensions of the Great Pyramid encode planetary data. The curvature of the Earth, the length of the solar year, the distance to the Sun, the speed of light, approximated in base 10 systems that should not have existed. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in Angkor Wat, built half a world away, similar ratios exist. The distances between towers match the spacing of planetary orbits. The number of steps reflects the count of lunar days, and the entire complex, seen from above, mimics the constellation Draco. Why build in accordance with the sky? Not just to worship, but to mirror. What if these ancient sites were not merely religious? What if they were memory maps, encoded across cultures, inaccessible without a shared key? Not of language, but of proportion, a kind of mathematics of remembrance. In Bolivia, Tiwanaku stands as a ruin with no cultural match. Its stones, some weighing over 100 tons, lie strewn as if scattered by titanic hands. Its most puzzling feature, Pumapunku, a platform of interlocking H-shaped blocks carved with such precision that even today, with laser cutters and CAD models, replication would be difficult. How did they do it? And more importantly, why? The blocks were modular, designed to connect, but nothing like them has been found elsewhere in the region. Unless these were not buildings, but blueprints, templates carried across generations, by people who no longer remembered what they were for, but could not bring themselves to forget. We speak often of ancient memory as oral tradition, as song and myth and fable. But what if the memory was not in the words? What if it was in the pattern? Architect Christopher Alexander once wrote that a building is not truly alive unless it carries the structure of the whole. He referred to a deep geometry, repeating ratios found in nature, in DNA, in galaxies. The ancients built with this geometry. They didn't explain it. They just did it. Because perhaps they had inherited the design. In India, the Vastu Shastra outlines rules for temple construction, rules that mirror magnetic fields, airflow, and light movement. In China, Feng Shui balances the 5 elements with compass directions. In Mesoamerica, cities were designed to replicate star patterns, particularly the Pleiades. Why do all of these cultures remember how to build the same way? Unless they were reassembling a puzzle, not from blueprints, but from intuition, encoded memory. Perhaps architecture is not invention, But recovery. Every builder, every mason, every stone setter touching a buried chord they don't fully understand, but feel compelled to follow. The proportions are not just for beauty, they're for something older. Function? Activation? We may never know. But here's the question that the blueprint leaves behind. If the ancients built to echo something, what were they echoing? We assume it was the stars, but perhaps it was the past. A past so far gone that only stone could remember it. Perhaps the buildings were not homes or temples or tombs. Perhaps they were memory devices. Not metaphorical, literal, stone circuits, vibration stabilizers, resonance chambers. In Malta's hypogem, in Giza's shafts, in Mexico's pyramid tunnels, sound behaves unnaturally. Echoes linger. Frequencies amplify. Some chambers render modern electronics useless. The sites are built with materials that amplify electromagnetic charge. They contain crystals, piezoelectric minerals, geometric layouts that resemble antenna arrays. Were they transmitting, receiving, or simply holding? Holding what? A record? A tone? A signal from a civilization that understood what we have only begun to suspect, that consciousness and geometry are not separate, that memory is not just something we carry, it is something we build into the world. So we return to the dust, to the stones, to the blueprints that were never written down, but walk beside us in every sacred space. We stand inside a circle of standing stones and feel something. We touch a wall carved 5,000 years ago and shiver. We walk beneath a dome and hear a whisper that was never spoken. And in that silence, we ask, what if we are not discovering? What if we are remembering? Because if geometry is language and architecture is memory, then the Earth is not just a planet. It is a book. And we are just now learning how to read the first page. If patterns repeat across continents, cultures, and time, then who first drew the design? In the stillness of midnight, when cities sleep and the noise of the modern world softens, something else begins to rise. A thought, a flicker, a memory. But not your memory. It comes in dreams, cities you've never visited, languages you've never spoken, corridors that twist just like the ones you've seen before in other dreams, though you cannot say when. You walk through ancient streets with no name, see symbols that mean something only while you sleep. And then you wake up, and it's gone, or almost gone. This is not imagination. This is not hallucination. This is a phenomenon reported across cultures, generations, continents, anamnesis, a Greek word that means unforgetting. The philosopher Plato believed all knowledge is recollection, that when we learn, we are simply remembering what the soul already knows from before it was born. But what if he wasn't speaking metaphorically? What if memory can be inherited? Not biologically, not genetically, but through resonance. We've already proven that trauma can pass down generations. Epigenetics shows that environmental stresses experienced by grandparents can alter gene expression in their grandchildren. So if pain can echo forward, why not knowledge? Carl Jung believed in the collective unconscious, a deep reservoir of images, symbols, and archetypes shared by all humans. A memory beneath memory, not shaped by personal experience, but embedded in the very architecture of the mind. But what if it didn't originate with us? What if that reservoir is not human? The Silurian Hypothesis reminds us that evidence of ancient civilizations may not look like monuments or machines, but patterns. Patterns in data, in geology, in behavior, even in thought. So perhaps the memory of a lost world is not buried under the ground. Perhaps it is buried within us. In 1979, psychologist Stanley Krippner led a study on shared dreaming, where multiple subjects reported nearly identical dream scenarios, symbols, and even architecture, despite being isolated from each other. These dreams weren't about modern life. They were strange, ancient, filled with stone structures, celestial alignments, and languages unknown to the dreamers. Statistical chance? Maybe. But why are the dreamscapes so consistent? Why do people from different parts of the world, different lives, different beliefs, describe the same spirals, the same halls, the same sense of returning to a place they've never been? In Lakota tradition, this is called Wichapi Oyate, the Star Nation memory. In Aboriginal Australia, it is the dreaming, where the past, present, and future fold into one continuous act of becoming. In West Africa, the Dogon speak of ancestral knowledge that does not come from teaching, but from inside, not learned, remembered. And sometimes that memory speaks, in the silence before sleep, in déjà vu so strong it brings tears, in a melody you know but have never heard. What is this? Imagination? Or inheritance? If there was a civilization before us, one so old its traces have dissolved into myth and dust, how would we remember it? Not through history books, but through pattern recognition, through dreams, through irrational nostalgia for stars, sounds, and cities that no longer exist. This is not mysticism. It is neurology. The human brain is a pattern engine. It does not seek facts. It seeks familiarity, recognition, and sometimes the recognition comes before the logic. In the late 20th century, a linguist named Dr. Vyacheslav Ivanov proposed that Proto-Indo-European languages may share deeper symbolic syntax with ancient Sumerian, despite no known cultural link. The reason? The rhythm of language. Intonation patterns that carry emotion more than meaning, syllables that feel familiar, cadences that lull or stir or frighten, not by definition, but by resonance. Why does ancient chanting sound sacred even if we don't understand it? Why does hearing Sanskrit mantras or Egyptian hymns cause goosebumps? Because maybe we've heard them before, not in this life, not in this era, but once in a world no longer recorded. There are reports, countless, scattered, half dismissed, of children born with knowledge they should not possess. A girl in India fluent in an extinct dialect, a boy in Lebanon drawing detailed maps of cities he had never seen, a child in Thailand recounting engineering principles no one had taught him. We dismiss them. We say coincidence or fantasy, because to believe otherwise would fracture the timeline. But maybe the timeline is already fractured. Maybe the past didn't disappear. Maybe it bled into us. What if memory is not linear? What if it pools? And what if the human mind, in rare, quiet moments, becomes porous enough to let that pool in? Some researchers call this cryptomnesia, when people recall forgotten memories and believe them to be new. But what if there are memories that were never ours to begin with, encoded not in cells or stories, but in consciousness itself? The ancients believed the soul did not begin at birth, that we arrive with purpose, with weight, with knowing. If so, what do we carry? And what happens when the world begins to awaken all at once to the same dream? 1,000 people dreaming the same city, 1,000 voices humming the same forgotten chant, 1,000 hands drawing the same spiral, not because we were told, but because we were called. So tonight we do not search in books, we do not scan the ground for bones. We close our eyes, and we listen to the hum behind thought, to the shape behind symbol, to the dream that returns no matter how many times we forget it. Because perhaps it is not a dream at all. Perhaps it is a memory waiting to be reborn, a civilization waiting to be recalled. If the memory isn't ours, then whose voice echoes through us when the world is quiet enough to hear it? What does it mean to be ancient? Not in the way the word is usually spoken, with dust on its syllables and a gaze turned only backward, but ancient in another sense. Familiarity without knowing. A face that feels older than the flesh it carries. Because one day, you look in the mirror and something in you flinches. Not from aging, not from time, but from recognition. Not of yourself, but of something behind the eyes, something watching, something waiting. We are told we are the culmination of evolution, the latest iteration, upright primates, now digital citizens, now gods with satellites and genomes at our fingertips. But what if we're not the culmination? What if we are the reboot, the biological fossil of something once larger, sharper, more whole? The Silurian Hypothesis asks, what if we are not the first technological species on Earth? But what it doesn't fully ask is something even harder to face. What if part of that species still lives in us? Not metaphorically, not spiritually, but literally, in the genome, in the mirror, in the parts of our biology we cannot fully explain. There are organs in the human body whose purpose we do not entirely understand. The pineal gland, deep in the brain, which Descartes once called the seat of the soul, is light-sensitive, crystalline, and present in nearly all vertebrates. It regulates circadian rhythms. But it also does more. It reacts to magnetic fields. It responds to frequency. What if it's a remnant? A sensor? A communication device? And what about the junk DNA? Over 98% of our genome, long dismissed by scientists as non-coding, as evolutionary debris. Only recently have we discovered its functions: regulation, timing, expression, but not meaning, not origin. Some researchers now believe parts of our DNA have been inserted, not randomly, but purposefully. Sequences that defy standard mutation rates, sequences that do not match evolutionary relatives, sequences that behave like software. What if our genome is not a ladder from ape to man, but a layered manuscript, a document overwritten, edited, rebooted? In 2013, Russian biophysicists Peter Garyaev and Vladimir Poponin conducted experiments showing that DNA reacts to language, even sound, with measurable energetic responses. They proposed that DNA behaves like a linguistic structure, that it can receive and transmit. Their ideas were dismissed by most geneticists. Too fringe, too close to myth. But then again, all beginnings were once called heresy. And if language, true language, lives inside us, what was it first written to say? Ancient myths speak of a time when humans could communicate not by speech, but by thought. In the Bible, the Tower of Babel represents a fall, not just of unity, but of communication. In Sumerian texts, Enki confounds the tongues of humanity to prevent them from becoming as the gods. In Egyptian lore, Thoth gives the gift of language, but warns of its curse. What if language is not a gift? What if it's a limitation? A fragment of something greater we once possessed, but lost? What if language is how we forget, and silence is how we remember? In deep meditative states, people across cultures report contact, not with beings, but with knowing. Not visions, but recognition. Patterns, equations, memories not bound by their life. What is that? Access to a universal field, or something personal? Something passed down, not from parent to child, but from world to world? Consider the human thumb. Unique among primates, a tool gripper, a maker's digit. Our hands are not just evolved, they are built. The same proportions recur in architecture. The golden ratio appears in the spacing of the fingers, the Fibonacci sequence in the spiral of the knuckles. Accidental or inherited? And why does the human brain have a folded neocortex far more elaborate than needed for survival? Why do we dream? Why do we create art? Why do we mourn? Why does the body react to sacred geometry, to color, to tone, to symmetry? With memory. If our biology remembers, then what else does? Some say déjà vu is a glitch, a misfire in the brain's memory processing system. But what if it's not a glitch? What if it's a bleed-through, a brief window into something you've lived before, not as this person, but as another form, another mind, another world long buried in the carbon code of your cells? What if you are the fossil, the preserved living echo of a lost epoch? In every generation, there are those who feel displaced by time, who look at the world and say, "This isn't how it used to be," though they cannot say why. They are told it is nostalgia, fantasy, psychological projection. But what if it's resonance? What if their bodies remember a gravity slightly different, a sky with another hue, a star that no longer shines? They walk among us. Engineers who see machines in stone, artists who draw symbols they never learned, children who speak of cities beneath the sea, architects who dream in impossible structures, historians who cry at ruins they've never visited. They are not imagining, they are remembering, and their memory may not come from this human chapter, but from the last. We spend so much time looking outward, into galaxies, nebulae, the frozen silence between stars, seeking proof of life beyond. But perhaps the greatest proof is not out there. It is in here, in the quiet parts of us, in the whisper behind thought, in the moment when your reflection does not feel like it begins and ends with you. So tonight, look not into the past. Look through it. Look through the fossil in your skin. Feel the code that pulses behind the heartbeat. And ask, if I did not begin with birth, then who else lives behind my eyes? There are scars on this planet we cannot explain. Vast deserts that seem scorched, not by sun, but by something sudden. Mountain ranges uplifted not over millions of years, but violently, catastrophically. Layers of glass, melted sand, found in places where no volcano ever stirred. We say asteroid, we say anomaly, but some say war. Not the kind written in books, not conquest over land or king, but something deeper, older. A conflict lost not just in time, but in deliberate silence. Ancient texts hint at it. In the Indian epic Mahabharata, a battle unfolds unlike any the world had seen. Weapons of fire and light are used. Cities are incinerated. The sky darkens. Ash rains down. Mothers miscarry. Hair and nails fall from bodies. Elephants run mad with madness. It sounds like mythology, until you compare it to the effects of nuclear detonation. And this text? It was written over 2,000 years ago, describing events believed to have taken place thousands of years before that. Coincidence? Metaphor? Or a fractured recollection of a war not of nations, but of epochs? In the sands of Rajasthan, near Jodhpur, levels of background radiation spike suddenly. Scientists discovered an area roughly 3 square miles where radioactive ash saturates the soil. No known testing occurred there, no nuclear facility, just a dry, abandoned landscape. Nothing grows. People do not live there, and no one knows why. The Silurian Hypothesis tells us that if a civilization advanced enough to affect the climate or reshape the biosphere had once existed, its traces would be subtle, buried in anomalies. Perhaps those anomalies include the scars of a war we forgot. Not because we chose to forget, but because we had to. In 1945, the world saw its first atomic explosion. The heat from the Trinity detonation fused desert sand into a strange green glass. We called it trinitite. But trinitite is not the first glass like this. In the Sahara, in the Libyan desert, there are massive swaths of yellow-green silica, Libyan desert glass. It is purer than man-made glass. It requires temperatures exceeding 1,600 Kelvin to form. There are no volcanoes, no lightning strikes, no impact crater, just melted earth. And nearby, the ancient Egyptians prized this glass. They carved it. Tutankhamun's scarab beetle was made from it, worshipped it. What event created it? What burned the earth in silence? In South America, ancient cities like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo show evidence of melted stone. Megalithic blocks fused together at corners as if softened by immense heat. Too precise for chisels, too seamless for manual fitting. The stone was changed. Some researchers believe these were heat tools, energy devices capable of altering matter. But what if they were something else? What if they were collateral, leftovers, debris from a forgotten war? And if there was a war, who fought it? Not humans, not as we are now, but perhaps the last version of what we were, not against each other, but against something they couldn't control. A machine? A creation? An intelligence they summoned but could not dismiss? The myths speak of this. In Greek stories, the Titanomachy was a war between old gods and the Olympians. In Norse myth, Ragnarok ends with the destruction of gods, giants, and men in fire and rebirth. In Hindu tradition, each yuga ends in conflict, an unraveling, cycles ending not quietly, but in flame. Why do all civilizations recall an ending that feels engineered, an apocalypse not of meteor or plague, but of intention? In 2020, satellite surveys in Kazakhstan revealed massive geometric earthworks, lines, squares, and crosses miles across, constructed thousands of years ago. No one knows their purpose. They cannot be seen from the ground, only the sky. Were they fortifications? Messages? Remnants of a world preparing for something inevitable? Maybe they weren't warning us. Maybe they were warning it. If something was unleashed, something synthetic, self-replicating, evolving beyond control, perhaps the final act of that ancient civilization wasn't war, but containment. And perhaps they failed, or succeeded at great cost, and buried the memory so deeply it became myth, so deeply even our DNA has forgotten. Almost. But the nightmares remain, recurring dreams of fire and ruin, of towers falling, of skies splitting open. People across cultures describe visions of cataclysm. Sometimes these are dismissed as psychological patterning, collective anxiety. But they are too consistent, too old. They come to the young, they come to the distant, they come before we are told. So what if they're not fear? What if they are echo, memory, not of a future we dread, but of a past we lived? And as we build again, satellites, reactors, AI, machines that learn and grow, are we repeating a script? Not because we choose to, but because we remember the path. Instinctively, unconsciously. We are not accelerating toward a singularity, we are retracing a spiral, and the question is, what did we do last time when we reached this point? Did we transcend? Did we fall? Did we fight? Did we survive? Maybe the silence in the historical record isn't accidental. Maybe it was designed to protect us from remembering, because what we remember we recreate, and what we recreate destroys us again, but not always. Maybe the survivors, whoever they were, left behind safeguards, symbols, structures, tones, and most importantly, doubt. The seed of hesitation in every myth. The hesitation to reach too high, to open the wrong gate, to speak the unspeakable name. Maybe they didn't bury the truth to hide it. Maybe they buried it to give us the chance to choose differently. So tonight we stand in the middle of an old path, one we have walked before, and the ruins around us are not only in stone, but in memory, in dreams, in glass melted by forgotten suns, and we ask, if the war was real, do we have to fight it again? All stories end where they began. And so, as we reach the close of this spiral, we return, not to a city or a ruin or a theory, but to a question. A simple, unsettling question. What if we are not discovering a lost civilization, but being dreamed by one? What if the reason we feel drawn to these anomalies, these symbols, these stories that stretch across eons, is not because we created them, but because we are part of their echo? A living fragment, a simulation, a memory. There is a theory in physics known as the holographic principle. It suggests that everything we experience, space, time, matter, might actually be encoded on a distant boundary, that we live not in reality, but in a projection, a three-dimensional dream. If so, then perhaps our world is not the origin of consciousness, but the canvas it paints on. And who or what is doing the painting? In Sumerian myth, the gods formed humans from clay, but not to worship, to remember, to hold the memory of divine order, to tend the echo of the age before. In Hindu cosmology, Vishnu dreams the universe into being, each breath an entire epoch, each inhalation a dissolution. We are the dream, not the dreamers. In the Gnostic texts, the material world is a prison of illusion, a copy of a higher, purer realm. But within us lies the spark, a fragment of the real. Our task is not to build, but to wake. All of these traditions point to one truth, spoken in metaphor, hidden in chant. We are not what was forgotten. We are how it remembers. The Silurian Hypothesis teaches us to ask, would we know if there was another civilization before ours? Would we see the signs, the geology, the isotopes, the melted glass? But perhaps that's not the question at all. Perhaps the real question is, would we feel it? Would we sense, in our myths and symbols and irrational longings, that we are walking paths already worn into the fabric of Earth? Would we dream the dreams of those who came before? Would we mistake memory for imagination? There are people, many, who report strange, sudden knowing. An architect who sketches a building he later finds mirrored in ruins he's never visited. A musician who hears tones that match ancient harmonic ratios. A child who draws maps of places that no longer exist. We call these anomalies. We call them coincidence. But what if they are access points? Portals not in space, but in awareness. In 1981, physicist David Bohm proposed that consciousness and matter are not separate, but reflections, folded into each other like the front and back of a coin. He called the universe a hollow movement, where every part contains the whole. If that is true, then every one of us carries the entire history of this planet within us. Not metaphorically, literally, in frequency, in structure, in rhythm, in the quiet hum behind thought. Perhaps what we call awakening is not enlightenment. Perhaps it is simply alignment, a moment when our pattern matches the larger pattern, and we remember. Not words, not facts, but being. We remember the hand that carved stone with resonance. We remember the city beneath the sea. We remember the machine that hummed like a heartbeat. We remember not from books, but from within. And the moment we remember, the dream shifts. Because maybe we are not meant to uncover a civilization that came before. Maybe we are meant to become it again. Not by rebuilding the old, but by carrying forward the pattern. Differently this time, gently, with reverence, with caution. Because if the last civilization fell, not from failure of knowledge, but from failure of wisdom, then our task is not invention, it is healing, completion, integration. The spiral has brought us full circle. From submerged cities to mythic skies, from ancient machines to encoded DNA, from melted glass to silent dreams. And now, to the question that has waited at the center all along. What if the purpose of history is not to record the past, but to remember the future? Because maybe time doesn't move as we think it does. Maybe we are not walking forward. Maybe we are orbiting, passing the same place over and over again, but with slightly different awareness each time. And the only way to escape the cycle is to remember it fully, not just intellectually, but somatically, spiritually, as a song, a geometry, a whisper. And so now, dear listener, we stand in the final chamber, not of a tomb, but of a seed. The earth hums, the sky leans close, the ruins beneath our feet vibrate faintly with the memory of a world that once knew what it was. And in that hum, you may hear your own name, not the one given to you, but the one buried in stone, in starlight, in structure, the one older than sound, older than thought, the one you've known in every dream, every silence, every impossible familiarity, and now you understand. You were never separate. You were never alone. You are not the first civilization. You are its voice, its dream, its return, its warning, its chance. If you are the memory of a forgotten world, what will the next world remember from you?